I never thought one decision could change everything, but that night did. I was just supposed to be at home, taking care of some college assignments, while Mom went out of town for a work trip. Her boyfriend, Dan, had offered to drop by and check if I needed anything. It sounded harmless at the time, after all, he had been in our lives for over a year now. He was polite, always smiling, the kind of man who seemed like he had everything together. But sometimes, what looks perfect on the outside hides something much more complicated underneath. It started with a knock on the door, casual, expected. He brought food, said Mom had reminded him I liked Thai. We sat at the dining table, made small talk. Nothing unusual. I remember thinking it was actually nice to have some company. The house felt too big and too quiet when Mom wasn't around. Dan asked about school, my future plans, how I was holding up with everything. It all seemed like genuine concern. And maybe part of it was. But there were moments, small glances, odd pauses, that made me feel a little uncomfortable. I shrugged it off. Maybe I was overthinking things. I told myself to relax. But things slowly shifted as the night went on. The conversation started getting more personal. He started bringing up old stories about when he and Mom first started dating, how different things were back then. He said things weren't the same anymore. I didn't really know what to say. I just listened, trying to keep the tone light. But I felt the air change around us. It was like I wasn't just my mother's daughter anymore, like in his eyes, I had become something else. Something I didn't ask to be. I stood up, pretending I had to go work on my laptop, but Dan followed me into the living room. He wasn't aggressive or forceful. That's what made it more confusing. He was calm, soft-spoken. He sat down on the edge of the couch, talking about how lonely he'd been, how no one really understood him. It felt wrong, not just what he was saying, but the way he was saying it. I didn't know how to respond. I kept trying to shift the conversation, hoping he'd get the hint. But he didn't. It was in that moment I realized things were crossing a line. A line that should have never even been approached. What happened next, I still replay it in my mind more times than I care to admit. A mix of silence, confusion, regret, and the kind of guilt that doesn't just disappear with time. I wish I could undo that night. I wish I'd spoken up sooner. But life doesn't come with rewinds. What happened between us didn't just change how I saw Dan, it changed how I saw myself. And it shattered my relationship with my mom in ways I'm still trying to fix. But the worst part? She still doesn't know. And the secret is eating me alive. I couldn't sleep that night. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, my heart racing, my mind tangled in 1,000 thoughts. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing Dan's face, hearing his voice. I felt like I had stepped into something I didn't fully understand, something that had no clear way out. I wasn't sure if I should tell someone or just pretend it didn't happen. But pretending felt like a lie, and the silence felt even heavier. The next morning, I got up early and left the house before Dan could show up again. I didn't want to face him. I didn't want to risk another moment alone with him. I went to the campus library and sat there for hours, just scrolling through my phone and pretending to study. I tried messaging my best friend, but every time I started typing, I stopped. How do you even explain something like this? I didn't want to be judged. I didn't want her to think I was to blame. But inside, I already felt like I was. Over the next few days, things got even stranger. Dan started texting me, not often, just enough to keep me on edge. Hey, hope you're okay. Or you seemed quiet the other night. Always worded innocently, but I could read between the lines. I stopped replying. I didn't want to give him any room to think I was okay with what had happened. But the messages didn't stop. They weren't threatening, just constant. Like he was testing the boundary, trying to see how far he could push before I pushed back. And then there was Mom. She came back from her trip glowing, talking about how Dan had really stepped up and how lucky she felt to have him. Every word she said twisted something in me. I couldn't even look her in the eyes without guilt creeping up my throat. I kept wondering, should I tell her? Should I risk blowing up her relationship over something that technically didn't go too far? But something did happen, something that crossed a line, even if it was hard to define. As the days passed, I started noticing little things. Dan would try to be around more when Mom wasn't home. He'd ask questions that felt too personal. He even showed up unannounced once, saying he forgot his sunglasses. I knew it was just an excuse. My anxiety was building, and I could feel something darker brewing beneath the surface. And yet, I stayed silent. I didn't know what to do. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. It got harder to keep pretending everything was fine. At home, I smiled when Mom talked about future plans with Dan, trips, maybe moving in together, even getting a dog. On the outside, I nodded and acted like I was happy for her, but inside, I felt like I was sinking. Every time his name came up, something in me clenched. It was like I was holding a secret too heavy to carry but too dangerous to share. One evening, Mom asked if I could help Dan plan a surprise for her upcoming birthday. "You two get along so well," she said, smiling without knowing what those words did to me. I froze, not knowing how to respond. I didn't want to be near him. I didn't want to pretend we were close. But saying no would raise questions, and I wasn't ready for those either. So I said yes, even though my heart screamed no. That week, Dan and I met twice at a coffee shop to plan. Both times, I kept it short, avoided eye contact, and tried to stay in public places. Still, he had this way of making things feel uncomfortable without saying anything outright. He'd compliment me too much or ask strange questions like whether I ever felt like my mom took me for granted. I didn't understand his angle. Was he trying to create distance between me and her? Or just messing with my head? Either way, it worked. I started second-guessing everything. Around the same time, something else happened. My best friend, Layla, noticed I'd been acting off. One night, after class, she asked me directly if something was going on at home. I wanted to tell her, I almost did, but the words wouldn't come out. Instead, I gave her a half-truth, saying things felt weird with my mom's boyfriend lately. She didn't press, but I could tell she knew I wasn't being fully honest. Her support meant a lot, but even with her, I didn't feel completely safe saying everything. Meanwhile, Dan's behavior didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. He became more confident, more casual around me, like he thought I wouldn't speak up. And maybe that was the scariest part, how sure he seemed that I'd stay silent. My own fear started turning into anger, but I didn't know where to direct it. Toward him, for what he did. Toward myself, for letting it continue? Or toward Mom, for trusting someone who clearly wasn't who he pretended to be? Everything was tangled. And something told me it was only going to get worse. The week before Mom's birthday felt like walking on glass. Every step I took around the house was careful, measured. I avoided being alone with Dan at all costs, but it wasn't always possible. He started dropping by unannounced more often, always with a casual excuse, just checking in, or thought you might need help with the party planning. His tone stayed friendly, but there was something in his eyes that made my skin crawl. Like he knew he had power over me now, the kind that came from secrets and silence. One night, I came home late from study group and found Dan in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a glass of wine. Mom was still at work. He looked up, smiled like nothing was wrong, and asked if I wanted to join him. I said no, headed straight for my room, but I could feel his eyes following me. I locked the door behind me and sat there in the dark, heart pounding, trying to understand how I'd ended up in this mess. I felt trapped between protecting my mom and protecting myself. The next morning, things took another turn. I overheard Dan on the phone in the backyard. His voice was low, but I caught pieces, something about not letting her ruin this and she won't say anything. I didn't know who he was talking to, but my stomach turned. I started recording from my window, just in case. My hands were shaking, but I knew I had to start collecting something real. If I ever decided to speak up, I needed proof. The trust between me and my mom wasn't enough anymore. Dan had twisted too much, and I could feel the ground beneath me slipping. Then came the real test. 2 days before her birthday, Mom asked me to stay home and help her set up while Dan picked up the cake and decorations. But that afternoon, she got called into work for an emergency shift. Dan will be by in an hour, she said as she grabbed her keys. I stood frozen, nodding, but my body felt like stone. As soon as she left, I locked every door and sat on the couch, holding my phone, waiting. He came, of course. On time, like always. And this time, he didn't knock. He used the spare key Mom kept hidden under the mat. The moment I heard it click, I knew something was coming, something I wasn't ready for. I heard the front door creak open and Dan's footsteps echo through the hallway. My body tensed. I had locked myself in my room just minutes earlier, but now I wasn't sure if that was enough. My heart pounded as I reached for my phone and opened the camera app, hand trembling. I didn't know what I was going to record or why I even opened it, but it felt like the only kind of protection I had. I couldn't call Mom, she was working a double shift, and I didn't want to call the police unless something truly crossed the line. But I was afraid I might be just minutes away from that moment. "Hey, it's just me," Dan called out like we were old friends. His voice was casual, even light. I didn't answer. I stayed still, listening to the sound of his shoes brushing against the floor as he made his way to the living room. I could hear him talking to himself, humming like he owned the place. Like he was trying to make me forget why I was afraid of him. Then everything shifted. My phone buzzed in my hand, a message from Layla. "Hey, weird question. Was that Dan I just saw near that hotel by campus?" He looked super nervous. I froze. I typed back instantly. "What hotel? Are you sure?" A few seconds later she replied with the name. It wasn't far from where she worked part-time. My fingers couldn't move fast enough. "When?" I asked. "Like 20 minutes ago. Pretty sure it was him." But that didn't make sense. Dan was here. In the house. Or at least, someone was. I crept toward my door and pressed my ear against it. Nothing. No footsteps now. No humming. Just silence. The kind that makes your throat dry up. I texted Layla again. "Can you check if his car is still there?" While waiting, I held my breath, heart pounding louder than anything else around me. A minute later she replied. "Nope. Parking lot's empty now. Maybe I was wrong?" No. She wasn't wrong. My stomach twisted. I opened the door slowly and peeked into the hallway. Empty. Living room? Empty. Kitchen? No sign of anyone. But the front door was unlocked. Wide open. I stepped out slowly, feeling like I was in some kind of dream. Then I saw it, the spare key was still under the mat. Untouched. That's when the second twist hit me like a punch in the chest. Whoever came into the house hadn't used the key. They had already been inside. My blood ran cold. I ran back to my room, locked the door again, and tried to breathe. Could it have been Dan earlier in the day? Had he hidden somewhere? Was this some sick game? And then came the sound that broke the silence completely, the back door. Closing. Soft. Deliberate. Someone had been watching me the entire time. I stood in my locked room, frozen, staring at the door like it might burst open any second. The sound of the back door closing echoed in my ears, followed by silence so thick it felt like the whole house was holding its breath. I gripped my phone, heart hammering, mind racing with 100 terrifying thoughts. Was it Dan? Was he hiding somewhere all along? Or was it someone else entirely? I didn't know what was worse, the fear or the not knowing. Finally, I dialed Layla. She picked up on the first ring. I whispered everything in one shaky breath: the unlocked door, the footsteps, the message she sent, the back door. "Stay where you are," she said, voice firm. "I'm calling someone. Don't move." Minutes later, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Then a knock on the front door. It was Layla's older brother, Adam. He lived nearby and worked in security. He called out my name, and I knew it was safe to open the door. I ran into the hallway, barely able to explain what had happened. Adam walked through the house room by room while I stood outside, arms crossed tight around myself, the cold air hitting my face like a slap. He came back out 10 minutes later and shook his head. "No one's here now." But someone was. He showed me a set of footprints near the back entrance leading into the yard. "Did your mom's boyfriend have a key to the back door?" I nodded slowly. "But I thought he was in the house." Adam frowned. "Then who did Layla see?" The next day, Mom came home early. I knew I had to tell her. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told her everything: how Dan had crossed boundaries, how he made me feel unsafe, how things had built up over weeks. I showed her the texts, the recording of his phone call in the backyard, and the messages from Layla. Her face went pale, her hands shaking as she listened. At first, she didn't say a word. Just stood up, grabbed her phone, and walked into the other room. I heard her call Dan and tell him not to come near us again. But that wasn't the end. A few days later, the final twist came. Layla sent me a screenshot of a local news article. It showed a blurry photo of Dan leaving that same hotel, with another woman. She wasn't just anyone. She was my mom's best friend. Someone we trusted. Someone who had been over for dinner just 2 weeks before. Everything made sense now. Dan hadn't just been playing games with me. He had been cheating on my mom too. Manipulating us both. That night, the footsteps, the unlocked doors, it wasn't just fear. It was the truth closing in. And finally, he was out of our lives. But the damage? The silence? That would take longer to fix. After everything came out, the house felt like a different place. Quieter, but not in a peaceful way. More like a heavy silence that followed you from room to room. Mom barely spoke for days. I could see her pain, not just from Dan's betrayal but from the guilt she carried for not seeing what he was doing to me. I didn't blame her, not completely. Dan was good at hiding his true self. That's how people like him operate. Quiet, calculated, always just enough to make you doubt your instincts. One night, Mom finally sat down with me at the kitchen table. Her eyes were red, and her voice was soft when she said, "I'm sorry. I should have protected you better." I didn't know what to say. There was still hurt between us, but in that moment, I knew she meant it. I nodded, and we just sat there in silence. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. A start to healing what had been broken. Over the next few weeks, we began picking up the pieces. We changed all the locks. Mom blocked Dan on everything and cut ties with the friend who had been sneaking around behind her back. I started therapy. Layla came with me to the first session and waited in the car. It wasn't easy talking about what had happened, but it helped me understand that what I felt wasn't shame, it was survival. I had trusted my gut, and even though I stayed silent for too long, I eventually found the strength to speak up. That mattered. School slowly became a place of peace again. I poured myself into my classes, trying to rebuild the version of myself I had almost lost. Layla never left my side. Her loyalty reminded me that real friends don't need every detail to stand by you, they just do. Sometimes I still think about that night, the fear, the confusion, the feeling of being watched. But it no longer controls me. I've learned that not every danger wears a mask. Sometimes, it smiles and says all the right things. Dan was that kind of danger. And even though I regret what I let slide for so long, I don't regret coming out of it stronger and more aware. This true infidelity story didn't just reveal the lies between a man and my mother, it uncovered the lies we sometimes tell ourselves to keep the peace. It exposed the layers of trust, betrayal, and silence that can build up behind closed doors. But it also showed me the power of speaking up, of facing the truth no matter how painful it is. Now, when I look back, I don't just see the night that took a turn I regret, I see the moment I started reclaiming my voice. And that changed everything. 40.